In my years as a leftist activist, I used to have an argument that I thought would end any pro-Israeli argument. It was an argument that, to me, made very clear why Palestinians were on the right side. And this argument was actually a picture. This argument was a series of maps. And we see these maps right now. They supposedly show us that through the years, Israel is grabbing more and more land from the Palestinians. So this is the first episode in our supplementary series trying to shed some light in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the question we will discuss today is, has Israel actually stolen Palestinian land? And our vehicle for answering this question will be this very famous, I would call it meme. But it's not just a meme, because this series of maps has appeared in reputable publications, and as you will see on your screen, but also this series of maps, the so-called diminishing Palestine or shrinking Palestine maps, has also been used by the Palestinians themselves. So, for example, we see the president of the Palestinian Authority pointing out these maps as an as a proof of the alleged historical injustice against the Palestinians. So, with me today is Elan Zurno, who will help me understand what we are seeing in these maps. So, let's break it down. Let's start from the first map that shows the area, the wider area, before 1947. And what I see here, Elan, is a few Jewish settlements, and everything else supposedly belongs to the Palestinians. So is this an accurate representation of what was happening?
No, this map is fundamentally dishonest. I think it's designed to fool people and create a narrative that is far from the truth. So we should go panel by panel through this map, and it's good to start with this first panel. But I think it's important to say, to answer your question, did Israel steal the land? The answer is no. It did not steal the land. And I think there's more to be said about the issue of, is there such a thing as Palestinian land? Is there such a thing as Jewish land? And I think the answer to that is also no. There's land that's owned by individuals. And then you can ask, what is their heritage? What is their background? What is their religion? What kind of beliefs do they have? There is no land that's owned by a collective. And I think that's one of the pieces of context that this kind of map drops. And the other thing to say, as just set up for this map in general, is that this map is an excellent example of a fallacy that Ayn Rand identified, called the fallacy of dropping context. So knowledge is not atomic. Knowledge is a network. Knowledge is something that's integrated. And if you rip something out of context, we know this from when people rip quotes out of context. That happens all the time. But if you rip knowledge out of context, it is not useful. You can't understand what you're being told, and it's usually used by people who are trying to lie to you or deceive you or trick you in some way. And I think this map is an excellent case study of that fallacy. So let's look at this map that you asked me about. This map is ambiguous over an important issue. So in one respect, the white areas that you're seeing represent settlements. So where people of Jewish extraction are living. What does the green represent? It is certainly not where people live, because big parts of this area are unlivable at this time. They're either desert, they're uninhabitable, they're not arable land, you can't farm them, there's no irrigation. There's just no civilization in some parts of these. So it's just not true that this is representing the same thing on both sides. What the green is trying to tell you is like this whole area was somehow peopled, and the white was peopled, and those are the two groups we're thinking about. But that's not historically true. What the green is showing you is a claim for collective ownership. And I think the important thing to see here is that there is no such thing. And the second thing that's important as sort of a principle that should condition this whole context is that the idea of this area as belonging exclusively and for eternity to the Palestinians is an essential tenet of the Palestinian cause. It is not a claim that has existed before the cause in any meaningful way. So what we hear, we're going to liberate Palestine from the river to the sea, we're going to own it for eternity in Allah's name. Those are the claims you hear from the different Palestinian factions. That is the default position that they take, that there is no speck of land that the Israelis can live on that is legitimately held by them. So the presence of every Israeli, of every home, of every factory, of every shop is illegitimate by that fact. So what this map is actually doing is smuggling in the Palestinian cause perspective. There is no size for Israel that's legitimate. And I think that's an important piece of the context that is pushed out of the picture, and you're made to think, well, look at all these people were living here, and then this small dots of white somehow comes and takes over like some sort of infection. And I use that because there's often that kind of dehumanizing perspective that comes into the Palestinian narrative. So this map is fundamentally misrepresenting the facts on the ground at the time, and it's deliberately, I think, ambiguous between political population and what actually was going on in terms of the land.
And also, of course, for thousands of years, that land, the whole of the land, was part of empires. So at that point, so after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the British took it over for some time. So there was no, let's say, Palestinian state, to put it simply. Now, let us move.
Just one more thing on that, Nikos. Sorry.
Yeah,
Nikos,
one more
I just
thing.
want to jump in. One more thing on this, which is, it's really important. So I said unequivocally that Israel did not steal the land. And it's not the topic for today. Today we're going to focus on this map. But one important thing to say about this issue is there is documented history of how the incoming Jews acquired the land. Now, we have most of that evidence. There might be cases where you could say the land was stolen. I don't think that's a predominant factor. What actually happened, and this is something I talk about in my book, What Justice Demands, America and the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, we have reams of evidence of how the land was acquired through purchase, trade, exchange of value for value. Now, you might go back and dispute some of those transactions. You might say this was not a fair price, but that's an important part of the story. So where you see these white settlements, those were acquired either individually or through consortiums where money was raised in Europe and other parts of the world in order to acquire the land. So there's a whole history here that, again, this is an example of dropping a context, whereas that is part of what you would need to know in order to assess the claim that this map is pushing about stolen land. But sorry for cutting in. Why don't you proceed?
It's okay. That's very, very important.